Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes, and today we're going to be diving into an insightful discussion on the updates on the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. A ceasefire in Gaza has officially begun after Hamas released a list with the names of hostages to be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners being held by Israel. The ceasefire had been delayed by almost 3 hours after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refused to commence the truce unless the names were released, which happened after the scheduled ceasefire start time. Hamas attributed the delay to a technical issue. The finalisation of the list of Israeli hostages to be released was a significant hurdle, suggesting that the ceasefire could be implemented soon. 3 Israeli hostages will be released at 2 p.m, with Israeli nationals Romi Gonen and Doron Steinbrecher being joined by British-Israeli dual national Emily Damari, who's also being released. Prior to the ceasefire confirmation, Israeli forces continued airstrikes across Gaza, resulting in at least 10 Palestinian deaths. The agreement calls for a pause in fighting and the release of the hostages, and around 95 Palestinian prisoners, which are expected to be released on the first day. We are joined by 3 guests today. We have Ambassador Anil Triganayat, who is a distinguished fellow. We also have with us, we have Yeshaya Rosenman, Project Director at India-Israel Mitra Project. And finally, we have Patakrit Pine, who is an international affairs expert. Patakrit, I'd like to come to you first. The significance of this ceasefire goes without needing to talk about it. But looking at the sort of diplomacy that we've had to go through to get to this point, is that something that you think can be continued, the conversation and dialogue between Israel and Hamas, to make sure that this ceasefire does hold and we don't go back to the fighting as we've seen it?
Good afternoon, Joshua and my respected fellow panelists. Well, I think this ceasefire or truce, whatever you call it, is just a very, very temporary thing. I don't think Hamas can continue to have peace with Israel. If you look at existence of Hamas and the fact that since 2007, it had enough opportunity to create a model state out of Gaza, it did not do so. They did everything to create an ecosystem which will harbor terrorism and which has this pure objective from their perspective to destroy Israel. So having a perpetual ceasefire is almost akin to recognizing the state of Israel in terms of Hamas perspective, if you look at it. So whether it is Hamas or the sponsors of Hamas, this ceasefire will only be an opportunity for them to consolidate themselves, because it is a given that there has been massive destruction in Gaza, and it is also a reality that wherever the Hamas was positioned, they have always used human shield. They had their bases, arms depot within the human localities, civilian localities. So even as they try to project that civilians have been killed, it is those bombings and everything that Israel did was primarily because of the existence and the presence of Hamas elements over there. So I think if you look at from the American perspective, the Americans are too keen to have this ceasefire in place, because I think for Trump, the focus will invariably be towards Iran. And if you look at what happened in Syria, this Tahrir al-Sham, that organization, which is almost a de facto ISIS, will try to do everything possible in Lebanon, Iraq or Iran. I am not saying that Israel will be against that. All I am saying is this: for Hamas to remain silent, it will be very difficult. And from the Israeli perspective, I think they continue to be at a state of war, because they have been at war with not just Hamas, they have been at war with the Houthis and the Hezbollah as well. So attacks from Houthis will continue, and Hamas will only wait for the next big opportunity when they can get more support to do the next attack. So this ceasefire, I think it was needed for 2 reasons. Number one, you need to bring the hostages back. For the families who had lost their dear ones or whose members are in that have been abducted, I think it's very difficult. And secondly, Israel is a state, so the state needs to reconsolidate its economy as well. There is always a cost of war for any state to bear it. Beyond the point, it's difficult. But I think it's only a matter of time, maybe 6 months, 1 year. But you would see, those attacks will continue. You can't have dialogue with Hamas beyond the point. You just as in India, we don't have a dialogue with Lashkar-e-Toiba or other terror organizations. So there can be a back-channel communication just to ensure that the hostages are brought back, some aid reaches Gaza, people of Gaza, and I think it's only a matter of time. Back to you.
Yeshaya Rosenman joining us from Israel. Thank you very much for your time. I want to bring it back to the hostages, as Patrick mentioned there. Is it a relief for the people within Israel now to know the 33 hostages who are going to be returned over this first phase of the ceasefire negotiation deal?
Hi, good afternoon. So yes, on one hand, it is a great relief for the very powerful lobby of the hostages, of the hostage families, with strong support from the media and various prominent figures. And not only for them, the entire Israeli public is happy that 33 hostages will be released from the hellish conditions in Gaza. Unfortunately, it is quite clear that possibly a bit more than half of these names are not alive and they will be returned as bodies. People have to remember that as well. On the other hand, there is the Heroes Forum, which is an alternative body of minority body of hostage families who do not want this deal. They want a military solution for the hostages, and they have a very cogent point, whether you agree with them or not. The prisoners that are being released, the Palestinian prisoners who are being released, I believe 700, the current number is, these are not, these are highly dangerous individuals. They are all convicted murderers, mostly serving life sentences, multiple life sentences. As an Israeli, who grew up in the 90s, I'm born in 1982, I remember the terrorist attacks that these people were responsible in the 90s after the Oslo Accords. These are some of the most iconic terror attacks in my lifetime. A Moment Cafe, Hillel Cafe, all these big bus suicide attacks, blowing up buses in Jerusalem. These are highly dangerous individuals. And it's quite clear, the statistics are quite clear. The vast majority of these people are professional murderers who will return to terrorist activities. So regardless of which side you take in this debate, it is quite clear that the danger is ever present. And Hamas is doing this with the explicit intention of resuming its violent attacks against Israel. This is Hamas's charter. That is what these people believe. They do not believe in building Palestinian society, in the welfare of the Palestinian society. On the contrary, the more Palestinians they sacrifice for their cause, they view that as fine. They are martyrs for their cause. They don't care. They want to kill Jews, to kill Israelis. That is what they want to do. And as to the next stage of the first stage, will include the release of 33 hostages, and then the program is for release of an additional 4 hostages every Saturday for 6 weeks. It is unclear how the additional stages will proceed because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition members have told him that they want war afterwards. Their notion is that Hamas is an ever-present danger as long as they are in power. They want to finish off Hamas militarily, and they predicate their remain in Prime Minister Netanyahu's government on resuming the war afterwards and eliminating Hamas's rule. So the first stage, it seems, will go on. Hamas cited technical difficulties for the late release of the names. That is not true. They are simply trying to play with the nerves, with the raw nerves of the Israeli public. That, for the same reason, they have not disclosed who is alive and who is dead. But it is unclear what will happen beyond the first stage of the hostage deal. Again, there is a great chance, a very serious chance, that after the first stage, the war will commence once more.
We have, in the last few minutes, heard from the Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar of Israel. He has been speaking. He said that this ceasefire could have come much sooner had Hamas have laid down their arms. Interestingly, he's also spoken about the potential instability moving forward. And Ambassador Trigger Nayat, I'd like to come to you and sort of build on what was said there in terms of looking at the sort of potential for a return of Hamas, but also looking at a potential return to fighting if certain parameters aren't met. Is there a real fear that this ceasefire is still hanging in the balance despite the agreement? We of course saw the delay as well. So do you think that this is something which is still an ongoing thing that needs to be resolved, or do you think there can be some confidence that this will hold for the foreseeable?
Thank you, Joshua. In fact, I must say that and admit that as far as the ceasefire is concerned and the release of the hostages, that has been the wish of the international community all these 15 months. And for the first time, we also witnessed the helplessness of the international community and the international organizations not to be able to do anything. And we saw that this was a touch and go kind of a situation. Every time the deal was about to be struck, and that's why this time there has been tremendous pressure. I somehow feel that this deal was concluded to happen before the January 20th, because President Trump had issued warnings to both sides, and very clear ones, that he wanted it before. Now, whether it will hold or not is very difficult to say, but very likely, as the other two panelists have said, that the war will break out once again. For the simple reason, there is a tremendous trust deficit. Hamas has adopted terror techniques, has been not recognizing this Israel as a state. On the other hand, Israel does not want a Palestinian state also. So as long as the Palestinian solution is not addressed, we are going to see these repetitive things happening again and again. Now we have seen if military solution was sufficient to get the hostages out, it would have happened by now. At the end of the day, Israel is the strongest and the most professional army. But fighting with a non-state actor, we have all seen that it is extremely difficult. What has happened even in Syria, it was mentioned by Patrick, this is legitimizing the non-state actors who have been indulging in terrorism. We have seen what happened in Afghanistan. So today the whole international community, and especially the superpowers, major powers, for their geopolitical ends, try to apply different standards in different places. Now, that is the reason that these kind of things happen and continue to happen. So, most important thing in my view is now, of course, the first phase will hold out, that some remaining Israeli hostages will also be released. That's all. But then, what is the day after? Nobody is thinking about the day after. If the day after is going to be that Hamas continues remaining, and because of the kind of civilian casualties, humanitarian crisis we have seen, this vicious circle of violence will going to be perpetuated, because this is not going to lead to any other solution until and unless there is a hope on both sides that the Israelis can live in peace with the Palestinians. So that is an extremely important thing. And I hope that President Trump this time around will work what he had started at one time, but to the advantage of both, and not simply as a deal, because deals have a lot of loose ends left in them. And therefore, I believe that it is a good thing that has happened. At least a good footnote is there, very much. But I also don't have hope, because see, any side can find a little bit of a violation to be the pretext of starting the hostilities. And that will once again lead to a major disaster. Anything can happen in the region. Another problem which I found was with the whole thing from the very beginning is that the world has been only concerned about localizing this conflict, that this should happen only between Israel and Hamas, and that as long as it does not escalate beyond a point. I mean, that is something that means you are not at all looking at the causes that will further bring about. You are also looking at a temporary solution, and temporary solutions will never achieve a durable peace.
Before we go back to our debate, I just want to add on to the statement that has come from Israeli Foreign Minister. He said, additionally to what I mentioned earlier, that Israel remains committed to and determined to achieve their objectives of the war. And he emphasised that this ceasefire was a temporary ceasefire. Bringing it back now to Gaza and bringing it back to civilians within the Gaza Strip who have been killed, tens of thousands, potentially more, displaced, living in humanitarian crises. Patrick, coming to you, the aid that needs to get into Gaza is there for everyone to see. Rebuilding Gaza, of course, is a further stage along this ceasefire deal. But how important is it that the aid gets to those who aren't affiliated with Hamas and those who are living in conditions where they're facing a fight to live?
So if you look at the role of UNRWA, it has been under a lot of scrutiny. There has been a lot of questions asked about the role of UN in Gaza. and they're working in cahoots with Hamas. And if it continues like that, so I don't think even if you give the aid, what the purpose of the aid, if it is to give a better life to the civilians, if you have to recreate the city, then invariably you have to ensure that the city exists the way it ideally should be. And for that, Ambassador Sir mentioned about the two-state solution. Even if the other side believes in a two-state solution, I don't think the Houthis, the Hezbollah, the Hamas believes in a two-state solution. I think they believe in destruction of Israel. So long as they continue with that determination and belief and ideological viewpoint, for Israel, it will be very difficult to just let things as it is. So even if you give them aid, first of all, how do you ensure that the aid coming from countries like Qatar or other places, even through UN, reaches, not Hamas and the actual victims? Well, it's very difficult to ensure that, because Hamas is actually ruling. They are the ones who are in government in Gaza. And secondly, of course, that those same channels have been used in the past for, bringing in materials for waging this war. If Hamas had been waging this literally long conflict against Israel from October 7, if you take that as a threshold point, that means there has been supplies coming. So the aid route has also been used for pushing in supplies. So how do you ensure that only aid comes and not any kind of material which will aid the war in future? At the same time, Joshua, it is a reality that today improvising basic materials to create war weapons, battle weapons, is not very difficult. So there are no yes and no black and white solutions or answers to these questions, frankly. Yes, aid should come. I don't think Israel would also be very, very reluctant to ensure that the aid comes. But then with aid, a lot of other things also come, and that creates problems. So that's why this truce is at best temporary. It is not going to be permanent. Even if it continues for 1 year, I think it will be considered a success. Back to you.
Yeshaya, looking at Gideon Saar's recent comments in his press conference, I really want to focus on his quote, temporary ceasefire. Do you think Israel's government is looking at this as a temporary ceasefire, or are they looking to end the conflict and end the fighting?
I think Gideon Saar is correct that it is definitely only a temporary ceasefire. The ideological right-wing parties and radical right-wing parties to the right of Prime Minister Netanyahu have already specified this, that they will topple his government if he does not commence the war afterwards to eliminate and proceed to eliminate Hamas. Ben Gvir's party, the radical right-wing party, is the less important of them, but Finance Minister Smotrich is the more important party here, and he said in his public statements that he has received assurance from Prime Minister Netanyahu that the war will begin afterwards to eliminate Hamas. I would just like to briefly follow up on what my esteemed panelists have said. As to the international community being reluctant to internationalize the conflict, I think this is a very important point, because on one hand, the actors are international. When you look at the Houthis in Yemen, they have nothing without Iran, without revolutionary Iran sending them ballistic missiles and weapons and drones. They have nothing. They are a ragtag army, and there is no even point of going after the Houthis in the long term. You have to go after Iran, the people sending them these armaments. So Iran is the head of the snake. Nobody has yet to speak publicly as to what the plan is long term vis-a-vis Iran. And it should be said that as long as Hamas is in power, they will continue to unleash these kind of attacks. That is the only objective of their rule. And every time they do that, the conflict will be internationalized. There will be riots in the streets of London, there will be rallies in Kerala, in Malaysia, in Karachi. So Hamas is the worst actor who has the power to internationalize this conflict again and again. And I think therefore it is so important for world peace to eliminate Hamas. And that, I think, people have to, I think it should be properly understood that what Trump wants to have as his signature foreign policy initiative, the normalization of Israel relations with Saudi Arabia, that is predicated upon the fact that Hamas cannot derail these things. If we remember, last year at the G20 summit in Delhi, there was the showcase item was the IMEC corridor, and that was, everyone understood, predicated upon Israel's normalizing with Saudi Arabia, and here we are a year later, and Hamas managed to postpone it for a year. So I think for the world peace, I think it is imperative that people understand the very dangerous role that Hamas plays here.
Ambassador Triganayat, Israel now currently sitting in two ceasefire agreements, of course one with Hamas in Gaza, but also Hezbollah in Lebanon. Do you think that the Israeli cabinet and Israel's army can learn lessons from the Lebanon ceasefire? We obviously saw and had seen strikes continue until recently, and I think the 26th is the cutoff for Israeli military action in that ceasefire deal. But do you think anything will be taken and implemented in making sure that this ceasefire deal also holds?
Well, there are two different things, in fact. The Hezbollah was the most powerful of these three H's that Yeshaya talked about. And today, of course, Iran is not in a position to fully support either of its three branches, except perhaps Houthis to some extent, who are still in the war. So in my view, currently, perhaps the Israeli government would try to look at Houthis next, while keeping both these ceasefire into play for some time. Because Hamas is already, according to Israeli estimates, 80% of their fighters have been decimated or killed. Major leadership is gone. It's an ideology, and ideologies take very, very long to go away. And whether we agree with it or not, at the end of the day, there has to be some kind of a solution, because see, cause and effect go into circles. And so we need to look at the solution. That's why the whole world wants that there should be peace in the region. There should be dialogue and diplomacy. Hamas can only be out if there is Palestinians, other Palestinian groupings come forward and start ruling Gaza. And international community fully supports, and there is some kind of a thing. And at the same time, the humanitarian excesses will also have to be stopped, because at the end of the day, it's also human beings, all sides. So we need to see, we have full sympathies with Israeli hostages. At the same time, the world is also aghast at the number of people who have been killed and maimed at the kind of humanitarian crisis. Patikrit mentioned that these are used for perhaps transporting arms ammunition or something like that. Yes, definitely. These people are also fighting a war for their existence. Nobody can say that they are doing a good thing, but at the same time, from their ideological perspective, they want to keep their relevance, because there is a cause for making a relevance. A relevance is that against Israel they do it, so they became relevant in the eyes of the people. There were some assessments and polls which showed that the Hamas, despite the kind of destruction we have seen, is still acquired much greater political heft in both Palestine, West Bank, as well as in Gaza. That's pity. That means we are strengthening by this the Hamas kind of an ideology. May not be the actors. And as the US intelligence has said, that there are more people have been recruited than the ones who were killed. So today also they remain as potent. They may not have the kind of weaponry supply system at the moment working, but it is a dangerous situation. A solution has to be found in a holistic manner, where Israelis can live in peace and safety and security, and the Palestinians can also have their own land and work the way it is. So I think that today situation is still grim. A little bit of a hope is there that at least the first or second phase will go through. In the third phase, when the real governance issue comes as to who's going to govern, because there was a talk about some of the international forces.
Ambassador Triganayat, I'm really sorry to cut you off. We just have a couple of minutes, and I want to go back to Yeshaya just for this one final question. A tweet has been released by Israel's Twitter showing the 33 hostages who are to be released. And what this tweet shows us is the variance in age, the variance in gender. We've got babies, we've got young children, we've got older people. In terms of the feeling within Israel, how sort of devastating is this on one hand, but also optimistic, given, of course, it's a reminder of the October 7th attacks and the number of people who were taken, but also looking directly at them returning and the positivity that the families will feel?
Many people feel deeply relieved. The issue of the hostages was played up at very loud volume by the mainstream media in Israel, a very powerful campaign and a lobby that they had going. So many people are deeply relieved. You'll see much of this in the media. But unfortunately, I think as the previous deals, the Shalit deal of 2008, I believe it was, in which one soldier, Gilad Shalit, was released in exchange for 1,500 Palestinian prisoners and convicted murderers, including a man named Yahya Sinwar, who initiated the October 7th attacks. So we have to remember this as well. I think, again, public opinion can be very fickle. People must be careful what they ask for, and I very much hope that people in charge of policymaking and the public at large will understand the grave dangers of this deal as well. And we pray for strength and fortitude moving forward.
Yeshaya Rosenman, thank you very much for joining us. Also, thank you to our other guests, Ambassador Anil Trigonayat and Patikret Pine. As the ceasefire deal commences and we move through the phases, of course, we will keep you updated on NewsX.